Our reading is taken from Luke chapter 7, verses 36 to 50. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven." "You have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned towards the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." How do we respond to the grace of God in our lives? How do we change as a result of God's gift of loving action coming and affecting us personally? What is the difference God's grace makes to us? What sort of person do we become? These are some of the questions that I think are raised by our reading this morning. Luke, in his gospel, perhaps more than the other gospel writers, paints pictures of grace. He gives us poignant accounts of Jesus showing grace, of Jesus telling stories of grace, of people responding to Jesus' grace. Why? Well, perhaps with Luke being of a Gentile background, he had come to know the grace of God in a different way. And he wants others to come to know the grace of God in their lives in a different way. Whatever reason Luke has, we are presented with pictures of grace in his gospel. And in our reading this morning, we have a vivid and wonderful story that contrasts the banquet hosting Pharisee Simon with the party crashing, yet unnamed but harshly defined, sinful woman. And in this story, we see the nature of God's grace played out, and the two possible human reactions to God's grace. Luke loves a meal table as a setting for his gospel encounters. And here we have Jesus accepting the invitation of Simon the Pharisee to attend what seems like a quite formal dinner party. The formality is indicated that Jesus was said to be reclining at the table. And at these sorts of occasions, the guests would lie on low couches, resting on their left elbows with their right arms free to eat with and their legs extended behind them. That sounds like a recipe for indigestion to me, but that was the way of things. However, this exclusive gathering soon found itself with an interloper joining in the proceedings. As a woman who is said to have lived a sinful life enters. The exact nature of her sin is unrecorded. Tradition has said she's a prostitute, and that is possible, but not definite. Some have said she's Mary Magdalene, but that is unlikely, as Mary is introduced in the next chapter in a different way. The unnamed woman, though, has had her life defined by her sin. The way she has lived her life up until this point has characterized how everyone else has seen her. 3 times in the passage, she is named as a sinner. She has been branded by the world. She exists at the polar opposite end of the social spectrum to the host, Simon the Pharisee. Yet with Jesus as the nexus, he brings these two opposites together. And they show an amazing truth about God's kingdom in their interplay. This woman has been proactive in seeking out Jesus. She has sought him out in another's home. And she continues this by going to his feet, which is the only part of him that is exposed as he reclines at the meal table. She wets them with her tears, dries them with her hair, kisses them, and then pours perfume on them from an alabaster jar which she has brought with her. There is such intimacy in this scene. You can imagine everyone else just watching in silence, hardly breathing. They may not have been breathing, but in Simon the Pharisee's case, the indignation was certainly rising within him. His exclamation is that if Jesus were really a prophet, he would have known what kind of woman this is, that she's a sinner. And Simon's heart is revealed in all its judgmental glory. Jesus, though, in the way he doesn't leap straight to rebuke or admonishments, but instead tells Simon a little story. And I read Rob Lacey's version. 2 guys, right? Both up to their hairlines in debt. Trouble is, one guy's almost bald. He owes about 18 months' wages. The other has a full head of hair and only owes about 2 months' wages. Both have no cash to get close to paying it off, so the creditor cancels both accounts. Now they both have a clear credit rating. Which of the two will be more grateful? Simon says it is the one who's had the bigger debt forgiven, and Jesus congratulates him on the correct answer. And that's about the only thing that Simon gets right in this account. Jesus then turns to the woman, but continues to talk to Simon. And Simon probably thought this had got to the point where the woman was going to hear a few home truths from Jesus. But it's Simon himself who's told how things really are in God's kingdom. Hospitality was not just a nice thing to do in Jewish culture, it was a social obligation, and there were strict rules as to what should happen when guests arrived at your home. A host was supposed to place their hand on a guest's shoulder and kiss them on the cheek. They were to be offered cool water to pour over their feet to cleanse and comfort, and then finally put a pinch of incense or oil on their head. Simon had failed to do that. He'd failed in his obligations as a host. He was stingy with his welcome. Yet this woman who was named sinful was extravagant in her hospitality in another's home. And Jesus praises her and admonishes Simon. Jesus acknowledges that this woman is responding in a way she has because God's grace has come into her life. She has known that her many sins have been forgiven, and so she responds to Jesus with great love. And Jesus says her faith has saved her. From this encounter, we can assume that the woman has previously heard Jesus preach, or even maybe met Jesus. She has encountered the good news, and it has transformed her life. And this is her responding in love to the forgiveness she's received. Simon the Pharisee, though, has his own decision to make as we come to the end of this story. Does he learn from the example of this woman, who, like everyone else, he has brandished a sinner? Or does he learn, and does he seek the grace and forgiveness of God and then respond to Jesus in faith and love as well? Does he seek to act in the opposite way to the way he's done so far? Or does he just carry on as he does previous? The way of judgment being first in his heart. The passage leaves the story of Simon unresolved, much like that of the older brother in the parable of the prodigal. This encounter with Jesus by a Pharisee and a woman named Sinful is a story of how the grace of God can come and transform. The grace of God is the most powerful agent of transformation in the universe. It transforms the hardest substance known to humanity, the human heart, mind, and soul. And the grace of God can renew them and reorientate them to their original factory setting. Nothing else but the grace of God can do that. No karma, no good deed, no prayer, no pilgrimage, no ceremony. Just the living grace of God given to us as a free, undeserved, unlooked for gift in Jesus that we accept in faith. In this grace-filled woman, and that's what I'm going to call her because it is so demeaning to call someone who has been so wonderfully transformed by God's grace a sinful woman. In this grace-filled woman, we see someone who can only respond in one way to the forgiveness and love and mercy she's received from God. She can only, literally, she pours herself out to Jesus. It's her own tears that wash his feet, her own hair that dries them. The perfume she uses would have been her most precious possession, her most valuable possession, and she uses that extravagantly on Jesus. She pours herself out in response to the grace she has been shown by God. She gives more than she can afford to give. This contrasts to Simon the Pharisee. The Pharisees were the examples of how you were supposed to live in that culture. They were the religious establishment. They were the righteous ones. Yet in this passage, there is something completely out of kilter in Simon's faith. There is a disconnect between his religiosity and the God he is said to worship. Where grace was supposed to reside in his heart, there is instead judgment. We read this passage and we're asked the question, who is the sinful one here? Is it the one who is labelled sinful, or is it the Pharisee? As we read the gospel accounts, does anyone really think that it is the Pharisees who are the examples that we are to seek to imitate as followers of Jesus? Yet, why have so many Christians over the centuries done their best to act more like Pharisees than they have done to act like Jesus or those who have been truly responding to the grace of God in their lives? We should always seek, as followers of Jesus, to be more like the one who was known as sinful in this story than the one who was known as Pharisee. We should choose grace over judgment. The response that followers of Jesus need to make in their lives is to live in a way that reflects the grace that we've been shown by God. Jesus in Matthew's Gospel tells a parable about an unforgiving servant who, after being forgiven a huge debt by his master, fails to forgive a relatively minor debt owed by a fellow servant. It's a parable about forgiveness, but forgiveness for a Christian is about grace. And so this parable is also about how you live in response to the grace you've been shown by God. And the grace we have been shown by God is supposed to transform our lives in a way that means we live differently. And that's what the grace-filled woman did in our reading. She came to live in a way that was totally out of character with her previous life. All those things that defined her previously were relegated, as instead she acted in response to the grace she had been shown. The first aspect of her response of grace to consider is her pursuit of grace. She pursued Jesus. She sought him out at the party, drawing close to him, as close as she could. His feet were the only part of him she could access, so that was what she directed her attention towards. In response to the grace we have been shown by God, in response to the grace we have responded to in faith, how do we direct our attention to Jesus? Are we single-minded in our pursuit of him? Would we be willing to burst into someone else's party just to spend time with Jesus? Or, as it would be more likely to look in our lives, are we prepared to burst through our daily schedules to spend time with Jesus? Do we desire to spend time with Jesus more than anything else? More than watching Netflix, more than drinking a cup of coffee, more than spending time with a good book? Is being with Jesus the most important thing in your life? Do we pursue opportunities to bring Jesus into our daily lives? Or are we content with compartmentalizing them so that Jesus plays no part in our work, family, or leisure, and Jesus is only allowed to engage with that religious aspect of our life? Do we seek out ways to show grace to others in acts of service in love, words of kindness, encouragement, reaching out in love to those who are on the opposite side of dividing lines, pursuing grace to those who are on the left or the right, those of different faiths, different sexualities, different races? Do we pursue grace that seeks to bring people together? The response of grace in our lives, the response of being forgiven, saved, redeemed, chosen, whatever word you like to use, that response, does it lead you to want to bring Jesus into the heart of your life? Does grace lead you to pursue Jesus in your life above everything else? Then there is the sacrifice of grace that the grace-filled woman shows. In showing grace to Jesus, she gave of everything she had. And in showing grace to us, Jesus gave of everything he had, including his life. We do not need to give back to God to earn our salvation, but we give back in response to the love he has shown us. And that is a way of sacrifice. The grace-filled woman was vilified in her community. She was known as sinner. Just for her to walk into that room with the good and the great of the town would have meant that every eye would have been upon her. There was a sacrifice of humiliation and judgment upon her by just walking into that room. Yet she did it. And Jesus did this all the time. He didn't care who he was seen associating with. He sacrificed his reputation time and time again, so much so that he became known as the friend of sinners. He was willing to humiliate himself in the eyes of others for the sake of showing grace. And the grace-filled woman sacrifices her most costly possession, that perfume. yet she lavishes it upon Jesus. What do we lavish upon Jesus in our lives? What do we give to him sacrificially, costing more than we can afford? Our time, our love, our energy, our money. Do we do things for Jesus as a response to the grace he has shown us, or do we do them because we feel that we should just do something, or because for some reason we're trying to earn our way into his good books? Do we give Jesus the leftovers of our lives rather than the best bits? There's a sacrifice of grace in our lives when we respond to the one who has hurt us with words of kindness rather than words of anger. When we offer forgiveness to those who've hurt us without a word of apology from them. When we withhold judgment instead of building others up. There is a sacrifice when we choose not to say something at times, and we choose to bite our tongues. All of these cost us something when we don't do what is often our first instinct, all for the sake of grace. Does grace lead you to a life of sacrifice? And then finally, there is the intimacy of grace. There is such an intimate action that the grace-filled woman offers to Jesus in front of others. Her hands, her hair, her tears. Where is the intimacy in our relationship with Jesus? Do those of us who are British by background fall back on our natural reserve and say intimacy is not for us? Do we keep intimacy for close family? Does our church tradition not lead us to consider intimacy with Jesus possible? Has the word intimacy become too associated with the sexualized culture around us? The reality, though, is that Jesus desires for us to be in an intimate relationship with him. We're not to be passing acquaintances, not to be neighbours who casually say hello to each other as we see them over the fence. Now, Jesus wants us to spend every aspect of our lives with him, wants us to open up every aspect of our lives to him. The ridiculous truth is that Jesus, because he's God, knows everything about us, but Jesus wants us to come to him and reveal the deepest things of our hearts and minds, good or bad. He wants to know our hopes and dreams. He wants to spend time with us in our lives, all our days. Intimacy with Jesus is not about going around singing "Shine, Jesus, Shine" all day, but it's about intentionally spending your day with Jesus. It's about acknowledging that without the grace shown to you by Jesus, your life would be a pale imitation of what it is now. There's nothing soppy or saccharine about the intimacy of grace. The grace of God was wrought in pain and suffering on the cross and opens up the possibility of true intimacy in our lives with God. Without Jesus dying to sin and rising to new life, we could never experience the intimacy that we can with God. The intimacy of grace will also cause us to seek out relationships with those who are on the margins, those who often have no one else to relate to. Jesus went to the outsiders to make them insiders in the kingdom. And that's the call of grace on our lives as well. The call to intimacy with the least and the lost. Do you seek out the intimacy of grace in your life? The grace of God paints a new picture in our lives. A picture of what life is really all about. It is a life lived with and in Jesus. We can live our lives as an extravagant response to the grace of God in the pursuit, sacrifice, and intimacy of grace. Grace giving our lives shape and purpose. Grace moving us away from judgment. Grace drawing us closer to Jesus. Let's pray. God of grace, come and teach us how to respond to the grace you have shown us. come and teach us to show grace to others at all times in our lives. Amen.